Greetings, I'm Glenn Witecki from the Witecki Law Office in Schenectady. We do a lot of estate planning and elder law here, and that includes helping people qualify for nursing home Medicaid. I've done a separate video talking about the Medicaid application process for single individuals. I've also done a separate one talking about nursing home Medicaid for couples who are high income, and by high income I mean $10,000, $11,000, $12,000 a month or more. But this one is about Medicaid for married couples who have less income than that. Now, oftentimes before one of a couple needs Medicaid for a nursing home, you might have done a trust, and hopefully more than 5 years ago you might have put your house in it or your camp or some other assets. And to the extent you did that, those assets are protected. They're not going to be available, and you won't be expected to use them to pay your nursing home costs. But anything else you have in your name, you are expected to spend it down. The person in the nursing home is entitled only to $15,750 in their name, and the other spouse who's still at home is considered the community spouse, and there's a range of assets they're allowed to have, somewhere between about $75,000 and $125,000. Depending on how much you start out with determines how much you can wind up with. But I don't want to get too much into the weeds on that subject. What I want you to know is that you're allowed these certain amounts of assets, and to the extent you have more than that, you're expected to spend them down. But thankfully for couples, there's something called spousal refusal in New York. And here's how it would work as a particular example. Let's say we have a couple with $500,000 in assets. Let's say they haven't done any prior planning. They have $500,000 in liquid assets and a house worth $250,000. Assuming that either the spouse in the nursing home has capacity and is competent, or that he or she has done a power of attorney previously, here's what we do. We transfer the house completely into the name of the spouse who's still in the community. We shift all the assets except retirement accounts, which we're going to leave in the name of the Medicaid applicant in the nursing home. We shift the other assets to the spouse at home, and we get the spouse in the nursing home below $15,750. If the spouse at home has more than he or she is allowed to have, we do something called spousal refusal, where the spouse at home says, yes, I have extra assets. I refuse to contribute them to my spouse's cost of nursing home care. If you do that under current law, the county where you apply has to ignore those extra assets and has to process the Medicaid application as if you didn't have them. Whether or not that changes given the huge budget deficits that New York State is currently experiencing, I don't know. But right now it's still good law, and this is as of May of 2020. So if you want to talk about this subject, how it all works, feel free to call. By the way, when the spouse at home has extra assets and refuses to contribute them, at least in theory, the county can sue that spouse and say, hey, you have extra assets, you have to contribute them to your spouse. But even if they do that and they recover that money from the spouse at home, keep this in mind. If that spouse at home were privately paying for their spouse in the nursing home, the typical Medicaid daily rate for nursing or typical private pay rate for nursing homes in upstate New York is around $13,000 a month, where the typical Medicaid rate for that same nursing home bed may be $8,000 a month, which is a $5,000 difference. So even if you wind up using your extra assets to pay for your spouse, you're paying at a much lower monthly rate, and oftentimes the county won't come after you because they don't have the resources to do it, and so on and so forth. So spousal refusal is allowed, it's widely used, and it's something you may want to consider taking advantage of if you have extra assets and either you or your spouse are in a nursing home. And you may have heard about the transfer penalty. So if you give away assets within 5 years of applying for Medicaid, then there's a penalty period associated with that. But that penalty period does not apply for transfers between spouses. So keep in mind, spouses can move assets back and forth every day, all day long. They are not subject to the 5-year look back or any penalty period. It's a complicated subject. I've tried to touch on some of the highlights. I encourage you to call set up an appointment, set up a video conference if you want to learn more about this. And please, I encourage you to look at the other videos on this site for related subjects, because there's no one video that explains everything you need, but if you put them all together, you get a pretty good overall view of what estate planning looks like in this office. Thank you.